A woman in a soaked coat walked into the most expensive restaurant in Lagos to ask for the food people were about to throw away, and the richest man in the room stopped breathing when he saw the crooked notch on the coin hanging from her neck. He had cut that notch himself with a bent nail 25 years ago. He remembered the exact sound it made. He remembered the girl he had given it to. Her name was Amara, though no one in that glittering room on the rooftop of the Marigold knew it, and no one wanted to. The chandeliers threw gold across the tables. Waiters carried plates that guests barely touched before waving them away. Amara stood near the entrance in shoes that had been repaired with fishing line, holding a cloth bag against her stomach, and she did not put out her hand for money. She only looked at the plates that were on their way to the bin. A young waiter named Toby reached her first. He asked her, low and sharp, what she thought she was doing there. Amara kept her voice small. She said she only wanted to know whether she could take the food that was going to be thrown out, that she would leave at once, that she would trouble no one. Toby glanced at her coat, then at the elegant guests, who had already begun to turn and stare, and he told her that a place of this level was not a charity kitchen. He told her to go. She nodded without arguing. She had learned that when you no longer have an address, some people stop seeing a human being and see only an inconvenience. She turned to leave. An older waitress, Mama Grace, caught her arm and murmured that she might be able to pack a little something if nobody was watching. Amara thanked her with a sincerity that seemed to cost her. She said the food was not only for her. 3 people were waiting in a shuttered warehouse near the Apapa docks, and the oldest of them had not eaten since morning. Mama Grace had already lifted a clean plate from a passing tray when a cool voice cut across the room. Folake Basie, wrapped in a dress that caught every light, asked why a woman dressed like that was standing in the middle of a private reception. Mama Grace tried to explain. Folake did not let her finish. She said this kind of thing destroyed the image of the restaurant, that if they began handing scraps to every person off the street, the place would be overrun within a month. Amara felt the stares settle on her skin. She could have answered. She took one slow breath instead, and she said, quietly, that she had stolen nothing, that she had asked only for food that was going to be discarded. Folake looked at her with a small, polished smile, and replied that even the scraps here had more value than people who wandered uninvited into a private evening. A few guests laughed softly, more to please Folake than because they found the words amusing. Amara's fingers tightened around her bag. She asked, one last time, if she could take the box that had already been packed. Folake took the box from Mama Grace's hands and set it on a table out of reach. Then she signaled for security. Across the room, near the tall windows, Kelechi Obiora had been speaking with 2 investors when he felt the temperature of the crowd change. People do not go silent all at once. They go silent in a wave, heads turning toward one point, and he followed the wave to its center. He had come back to this city for the first time in 25 years. He had left it as a boy of 10 when his father moved the family overnight, and he had built something enormous in the years since. Solstice Grid had strung solar microgrids across villages that had never seen a light switch, across slums where the state power had never once arrived. His name had become a shorthand for a certain kind of success. And still, since the plane had touched down 3 days earlier, some part of him had felt hollowed out. He had walked the old streets looking for his school, for the little square where he used to play, for the house next door where a girl named Amara had once lived. He had found renovated buildings, shuttered shops, and the faces of strangers. He did not recognize her, not at first. The woman being edged toward the door by 2 men, in dark suits, had a face marked by years he could not read, her head bowed, her shoulders curved inward like someone bracing against weather. He excused himself from the investors and moved toward the scene. Folake lifted a hand at once to show him she had it under control. She explained that a stranger had come in for food and that she was having her removed. He asked calmly why they did not simply give the woman a box and let her go. Folake said it was not a question of food but of standards, of image, that a man of his position could not allow anyone to turn into a beggar in the middle of his guests. The woman raised her eyes. For 1 second she looked straight at Kel, and she did not know him. The thin, anxious boy from her childhood had become a man in a plainly cut dark suit, no watch, no rings, nothing that shouted money, and that was somehow the strangest part of him. She had never learned the name he used now. She looked away, certain that hunger and exhaustion were playing tricks on her, and she thanked Mama Grace and turned toward the door. That was when the cord slipped out from under her collar. The old coin swung once under the chandeliers, catching the light. Kel stopped. Every sound in the room seemed to fall away. He knew that notch. He remembered the afternoon he had made it, the nail he had taken without permission, the way his mother had shouted when she found the tool. He took a step toward the woman and asked her to wait. His voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a man giving an order in his own establishment. It was the voice of a boy pulled suddenly back across a quarter of a century. Amara turned slowly. He looked at the coin and asked where she had gotten it. Her hand rose to cover it on instinct. She said it had been hers since she was a child. That a boy gave it to her before he left the city, that she had never seen him again. Kel felt his throat close. He said a name he had not spoken in 25 years. He called her by the small private name he had used when they were children. Amara went pale. No one had called her that since the morning the boy disappeared. She studied his face, the shape of his eyes, the way he tilted his head when he was waiting for an answer, and her breath caught. She whispered his name, as though she could not trust it. And Folake, standing between them, understood nothing except that a woman she had just humiliated had suddenly become the most important person in the room. Amara did not fall into his arms. She stepped back. She said she had to go. She left the packed box on the table, walked out past the security men, and disappeared into the wet street, and Kel went after her, without listening to Folake calling his name. The cold had taken the roads. Amara walked fast in her ruined shoes. He caught up to her near a crossing and told her he was not trying to shame her. She wheeled around, eyes bright and furious, and asked him what he wanted to hear. Did he want to know how the girl who once shared her lunch with him had become a woman who begged for the leftovers of rich people? Did he want to know where she slept, or how many days it had been since a real meal? He took the words without answering. She almost apologized and did not. She told him she was glad he was alive, glad he had succeeded, but that their lives no longer had anything in common. He said it was not for her to decide that in 5 minutes on a street corner. She glanced at a clock over a chemist's shop and startled. She said she had to go, that people were waiting. He offered to drive her. She refused and kept walking, and he followed, because nothing in the world seemed more important than this woman vanishing into a dark street with an empty bag. After a while she understood he would not turn back, and she agreed to let him come, on one condition. He was not to ask a single question in front of the others. They crossed 2 districts and came to the shuttered warehouse behind the old goods yard, where a broken window had been patched with cardboard. Amara knocked 3 times, waited, and knocked twice more. The door opened on a wary face, and behind it Kel found 3 people gathered around a small electric heater. There was Baba Ismail, an old man who had once taught a school, his eyes gone to milk, his hands folded in his lap. There was Zainab, 19, who flinched at the sight of a stranger in an expensive coat, and who Kel would later learn had run from a husband who used his fists. There was Sunday, a dock worker in his 20s, laid off when the yard cut its shifts, who worked the night market when he could find the work. Baba Ismail lifted his blind face toward the door and asked if Amara had found anything to eat. She closed her eyes for a moment, ashamed to have come back empty-handed. She promised she would go out again, and Kel understood then that she had not lied at the restaurant. She had not asked for scraps for herself. He took out his phone and called the Marigold and told them to prepare hot meals, drinks, and blankets, and to send them here. Amara tried to stop him. He told her gently that he was not doing it to buy her silence or to display his money. The people in this room were hungry, and the food existed, and there was nothing else to discuss. Less than an hour later, a car arrived with several bags. Amara made everyone sit and share properly before anyone ate. Kel watched her serve each person first and keep the smallest portion for herself. She knew their tastes and their fears. She gave the softest piece to Baba Ismail and cut his meat for him. Kel remembered that at school she had done the same thing, sharing before she ate, and he understood that poverty had not made her generous. She had always been generous. Life had simply repaid that goodness with one loss after another. The thought hurt him more than anything he had seen that night. Folate called him. He stepped outside to answer. She asked what had come over him, to walk out of his own reception to chase a stranger. He told her Amara was not a stranger. Folate reminded him that they were expected to announce their engagement soon, that 30 journalists at the restaurant had noticed him leave. He said no date had ever been set, that he had never agreed to make their relationship public that evening. Her tone shifted. She asked whether he would truly ruin an important night over a childhood memory. He told her the memory had a name, and that she had just been humiliated in a place he owned. Folate said she had only protected his image. He told her he did not want an image that required refusing food to hungry people, and he ended the call. She stood alone in the middle of the restaurant, and for the first time in 2 years with him, she felt that another woman could take a place she already thought of as hers. She did not fear Amara's beauty. Hunger and hardship had dulled that. She feared what Amara represented, a part of Kel she had never touched. A life before the money, memories no fortune could manufacture. She asked an employee to tell her everything he had heard. And a cold, quiet resolve began to grow in her, the kind that does not raise its voice. Over the following days, Kel came back. He did not always bring gifts. Sometimes he brought bread, or helped Sunday fix the heater, or sat with Baba Ismail while the old man recited poems from memory in a language Kel half remembered from childhood. He brought a lawyer who specialized in protecting vulnerable adults, and a woman who ran a shelter he trusted, and he insisted that nothing be done without Amara's agreement and that the group not be split apart. His assistant asked why he was involving himself personally. He said he needed to understand before he could delegate. In truth, he wanted to see her. That surprised him. For years, he had organized his life around clean decisions. He knew why he bought a building, why he refused a contract, why he flew to a city. With Amara, no logic applied. He simply wanted to know whether she had slept, whether she had eaten, whether she still wore his coat. When he arrived at the warehouse one morning, he found her mending a shoe with heavy thread, and she looked up, startled that he had kept his word. She told him her story in pieces, over days, never all at once. Her mother had fallen ill when she was young, and Amara had missed school to care for her, and her mother had died when she was 17. She had worked in a canteen, then in restaurant kitchens. She had married a man who seemed kind and became cruel and took her savings. She had ended up with no home and no one. Later, she had managed to open a small meal service with a partner, feeding dock laborers and market families, and the partner, a man named Emeka Duru, had signed debts using her name and vanished with the money. She had lost the business and the room she rented. Kel's jaw tightened as he listened. He wanted to find everyone who had hurt her. He knew she was not telling him this so he would take revenge. She wanted him to understand how a life could break slowly without a person ever giving up. He asked her what she wanted for herself. She said she wanted to work in a kitchen. Again, that she did not want to depend forever on the help of others. He offered her a position in one of his restaurants. She refused, afraid the staff would respect her only because she knew the owner. So he asked her to sit a real interview with a manager who knew nothing of their history. She agreed. She was hired at a less prestigious kitchen in another district, and on her first day her hands shook as she tied her apron. Within hours her movements were precise again. She knew how to organize the plates, how to cut waste, how to settle a fight between line cooks before it spread. After a week, the manager called Kel to say Amara was one of the most serious people she had hired in years. He did not pass the compliment along at once. He let her earn it with herself. And this is where the story turns, because Folake had been watching, and she had chosen not to fight in the open. She went to the man who ran the shelter, and to a journalist she knew, and she planted a story. She hired Emeka Duru, the very partner who had ruined Amara, to reappear at the right moment. A video surfaced online, footage from the night of the reception, cut to remove Folake's cruelty and arranged to make it look as though Amara had slipped into the restaurant after recognizing a millionaire. A headline accused a homeless woman of using an old relationship to seduce a rich man. Within hours, it was shared thousands of times. Journalists appeared outside the kitchen where Amara worked. Customers filmed her without permission. Her manager, who respected her, asked her to stay home a few days to avoid the disorder. When Amara left by the back door, a group was waiting. They asked her cruel questions. How much had he given her? Was she planning to marry him so she would never sleep on the street again? She tried to leave, and the cameras followed. Then a man stepped into her path and held up an envelope. He said he had documents proving that Amara had lied to Kel, that she was not the victim she pretended to be. Amara recognized him, and the color left her face. It was Emeka. And behind him, in a car with dark windows, Folake watched with a smile that did not warm her eyes. For years, Amara had imagined the moment she would see Emeka again. She had thought she would scream, or demand an explanation, or call the police. Standing here, surrounded by phones hungry for the smallest gesture, she felt only an immense tiredness. Emeka held the envelope up to the cameras and said she had not told the whole truth, that she had deliberately bankrupted their business and disappeared with part of the money. Voices drowned hers. Someone reached for the coin at her neck to film it better. She pushed the hand away on instinct, and a voice cried out that she had turned violent. The air thinned. Everything she had rebuilt over the last weeks seemed to fall apart in seconds. But the truth, in the end, did not come from a courtroom, or an auditor, or a device hidden in someone's jacket. It came from a shoebox. For years, Amara had kept an old shoebox at the bottom of her cloth bag, the one thing she had carried through every place yet she had lost. Inside were the original registration papers of the meal cooperative, a stack of receipts, and a single sheet that named Emeka Duru as the sole manager of the account. She had thought the papers were worthless. She had never opened the box again because opening it hurt. Now, with her hands shaking, she crouched on the wet pavement and took the box out and lifted the lid in front of the cameras. The dates on Emeka's envelope did not match the dates on the originals. His story required her to have controlled money she had never been allowed to touch. Anyone who read both could see it. There was no music, no dramatic reveal. There was a woman on the ground, holding old paper up to the light. Emeka's face changed for a fraction of a second, and that was enough. Believing he had already won, greedy for the rest of what he had been promised, he leaned toward the dark-windowed car and said, loud enough for the phones to catch it, that he had done his part and wanted the rest of his money. He did not name Folake. He did not have to. Every person filming understood in that instant that someone had paid him. Then the neighbors began to speak, and no one had asked them to. A woman from the old district pushed to the front and told the cameras that Amara had fed her children for weeks for free when she lost her job. An old man who sold from a barrow said that in the days of the cooperative, it was always Emeka who held the ledger, never Amara. And a quiet woman named Nkechi, who kept the books for one of Folake's foundations, arrived last, and she did not carry a recording or a hidden file. She carried a small handwritten notebook, the kind anyone keeps, in which she had written down, out of a habit she could not explain, each time she had been told to hand cash to a certain man rather than transfer it, so there would be no record. She had stayed silent for weeks because she was afraid for her job and her family. She spoke now because she could not carry it any longer. Kel arrived while she was still speaking. He came through the crowd without slowing and put himself between Amara and the cameras. He did not ask what had happened. He saw her pale face and her trembling hands in the cameras pressed too close, and he took off his jacket and set it over her shoulders, the way he had the night they found each other again. A journalist asked him if he loved her. He stopped for a second. He could have avoided the question, or protected his image, or called her an old friend. Instead, he looked at the cameras and said that he cared for her deeply, but that this moment was about a woman who had been hunted and shamed without ever being allowed to defend herself, and that if they truly wanted the truth, they should wait for the facts instead of turning her suffering into a show. He did not declare his love in public. He knew she did not need another man speaking in her place. But he did not step back to protect himself either. There was no dramatic arrest at an airport. Emeka fled the city in disgrace when it became clear the papers and the neighbors and the notebook told one consistent story. Folake did not go to prison in handcuffs before a wall of flashbulbs. She was undone by something slower, and in its way, worse. The video spread, and then the second video, the one where Emeka asked for the rest of his money. Invitations were withdrawn. Partners stepped away. The very circle, whose approval she had built her life around, began quietly to close its doors to her. When Kel met her one last time, in a monitored lounge at his hotel, she did not weep and beg. She told him she had only protected their relationship. He asked her against what? She said against a woman who used guilt and memories to take a place that was not hers. He said Amara had asked for nothing. Folake said that was exactly what made her dangerous. She did not regret what she had done. She only regretted being caught, and she argued to the end that she had merely been protecting standards. He looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time, and he told her he was no longer sure he wanted to belong to a world that needed that kind of protecting. Amara was not entirely free of consequence. She had signed papers she never read, trusting a man she should not have, and she had ignored summonses she was too frightened and too poor to answer. She said so plainly to anyone who asked, because she was done hiding the parts of her story that shamed her. But she had not stolen, and she had not staged a bankruptcy. And slowly the record was corrected. When it was, she sat down and cried, and she was not crying only from relief. She was crying for the years she had believed her life was destroyed by her own mistakes. Kel sat near her, without touching her, until she took his hand herself. She thanked him for believing her. He told her he had not believed her blindly. He had looked at who she was, listened to the facts, and refused to let noise stand in for truth. She said few people had ever done that for her. She went back to the kitchen because a group of her coworkers had signed a letter asking for her return, and because the people of the old district had shown up at the door on the morning she came back, and no one filmed them cruelly this time. She began to save part of her wages. She bought new shoes and a coat for Baba Ismail before she bought anything for herself. Kel scolded her gently when he found out, and she told him he had no right to say how she spent her first honest wages, and he agreed that she was right. Their closeness returned in small touches. They teased each other and remembered old things and learned the shapes of the adults they had become. Zainab was placed with a support program that let her stay close to Amara. Sunday joined a training scheme and kept visiting every week. Baba Ismail was given a room he could keep. The small community that had formed in the warehouse did not disappear. It only changed its shape. Amara kept gathering everyone for a meal every Sunday, and Kel came when he was in the city and called at the end of dinner when he was not. Amara finished a course in kitchen management and became a head cook. She built a system for collecting food that restaurants would have thrown away and redistributing it to people who needed it, and she refused to let the project carry Kel's name or her own. She called it Open Table because she wanted a place where no one would be shamed for asking to eat. The first location was set up in a part of the Marigold. In the very room where they had found each other again, The hall once reserved for private receptions turned into a community kitchen by day. The waiter who had tried to send her away came and offered a sincere apology, and she did not humiliate him. She only asked him to remember that a badly dressed woman could be a mother, a former teacher, a neighbor, or someone's first love, and that above all she could be a human being, even if no one wealthy happened to know her name. A year after the night at the restaurant, Kel took Amara back to the empty lot where they had grown up. He had bought the land, and he had built no hotel and no tower on it. With her agreement and the neighbors, it had become a community garden around the old flame tree. There were benches and a small play area and an outdoor kitchen used during the food distributions. Amara thought she had come for the anniversary of Open Table. The others were there, Baba Ismail and Zainab and Sunday and the neighbors, and Kel seemed strangely nervous. After the meal, someone brought out the old tin box they had dug up months earlier from under the tree. Kel opened it and took out their childhood promise, protected now behind glass, the letters almost worn away except for one line that was still legible, the line where two children had sworn they would find each other again even if they grew old and different. He told her he had first believed he loved her because she reminded him of the best of his childhood. But watching her rebuild her life, defend the people no one else would, walk back into a kitchen, and refuse to trade her dignity for comfort, he had understood he had fallen in love with her a second time. And this time with the whole woman, her past and her wounds and her stubborn strength. He said he did not want to save her, and he did not want to own her. He wanted to walk beside her, to listen when they disagreed, to support what she built. Then he knelt, and he held out a simple ring beside a small pierced coin like the one on her neck, and he asked her to become his wife. She pressed her hands to her face. She looked at the old tree and the box and the man who had finally kept his promise to come back. She told him she was not saying yes to the boy she had waited for, nor to the millionaire the world admired. She was saying yes to the man who had learned to stay without deciding in her place, to apologize when he was wrong, and to love without using his fortune as an answer to everything. And she said yes. They married in the garden, under the flame tree, and when they exchanged their rings, a light rain began to fall, and no one ran for shelter. The guests laughed. Amara looked up at Kel and reminded him that rain had once washed away the note he left at her door. He answered that she could not wash away what he had just said in front of everyone they loved. Later, she would stand outside the restaurant where she had once asked for scraps and watch a woman in a worn coat receive a hot box and an address for help, and no one chased her, and no one filmed her, and Kel would take her hand. She would tell him she still thought about the person she had been that night, certain her life had no value left. He would tell her that even before he recognized her, she had already been worth everything. His love had not created her value. It had only learned at last to see it. If a story like this moved you, if you have ever been the person no one looked at twice, stay with this channel. The first man glanced at his subscribe. Leave a comment telling me the country you are watching from, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that dignity is not something the world hands you and takes away. I read every comment, and I am glad you are here.